Теперь петербургский театральный сезон онлайн.
Good evening, dear friends. My name is Alexander Boltunov, and I'm happy to welcome all the lovers of theatre who join us today for our broadcasting from different parts of the world. Today, on October 10th, 2021, we, together with you, open the festival St. Petersburg Theatre Seasons Online, which is going to be carried out here with the support of the Culture Committee of St. Petersburg. Today, this year, we meet at this festival in the Institute of St. Petersburg Institute of Scenic Arts, and this is the oldest educational establishment. With me here, the artistic director of Priut Komedianta, Viktor Minkov. Good evening, Viktor Minkov. Good evening, Alexander Vladimirovich. Well, will you answer the question? Because of pandemic situation, this is the second year already when we broadcast our festival online. So, what is the approach of the festival these days? What is your feelings about the online festival? This is a good question. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to welcome all our audience who join us, because at the moment the whole world is watching us. And you know, it's important not to get used to this format, because really it has very important and interesting features already. But what is more important is that our landmark performances and landmark theaters show themselves to the whole world. This is not focused only to one specific country where we used to work, but now we broaden, we make our geography broader, and this is one thing. And I think that when times will come, when we'll get back to our usual schedule, offline schedule, showing our performances, it will be easier for us, because all those big cities where we used to go, they will be aware already about us, and of course, making our audience wider. And this is very good. And all those events that company Neva-Art develops for us, this is very interesting, which adds a lot to this wild-scale enterprise, because you know that for the period of 15 years already, this festival has become one of the major events which is supported by the Committee of Culture of St. Petersburg, and it is very important that all these years the city has been supporting and promoting our festival. This is very good, and I want to remind to our foreign viewers that we have the English version of our festival on YouTube player. For that, you have to choose the English site of the English version of the site. And also, you can have the Russian version of the festival in our group Contact. We called our meeting Rereading Again, and we are going to talk about the classical novels and classical literature, classical pieces of art. So this is why we're going to speak about about performances based on the classical literature. So our festival is going to be opened by Uncle Vanya, the performance of the Mali Theatre which was staged by our prominent director Lev Dodin. And before we start talking about the relations between the classics and the we just want to offer you a small video.
St.
Petersburg Malый Drama Theatre, Theatre of Europe, is an award-winning theatre, including Russian Award Golden Mask and St. Petersburg Award Golden Soffit.
Все это, конечно же, благодаря огромному таланту руководителя театра Льва Абрамовича Додина
artistic
и его
director Lev
замечательной
Dodin and
труппы.
his fantastic, remarkable company. And of course, this memorable place really contributes to this success. There were times when this was the ownership of Verkhovtsev, the founder of gold and silver jewelry workshop, and a supplier of gold and silverware to the Tsar court. At the very beginning of the 20th century, on the place of the silver and bronzeware factory appeared a cinematography workshop, which, after a long period of decades, was reconstructed into the Troitsky Theatre of Miniatures. These were times when cabaret was a very popular form of a theatre. Cabaret has become a favorite place for Russian futurists, who in 1912-1913 used to have here a number of disputes and meetings with Vladimir Mayakovsky, David Burlyuk, Alexei Kruchonych and Kazimir Malevich, who joined them later. After the revolution, this building hosted quite a number of artistic companies like Theatre of Satire, Malый Theatre, Funhouse Mirror, but they didn't happen to turn the place into their home for a longer period of time. In 1956, Leningrad Theatre of Small Forms has moved into this building, which was created in 1944, but in its first early 8th period remained to be a strolling theatre company and didn't have its own property. In different years, this theatre was run by different directors like Hammer, Vadim Sergeyevich Golikov, but starting from 1973, Yefim Padve has become its artistic director, a student of Tovstanogov. I remember this time very well. Padve's performances based on the plays of Dombadze, Vampilov, Hemingway. They were very popular among progressively thinking audience. It was Padve who has been always actively cooperating with young directors, invited Lev Dodin, who has worked already with Zinovy Karagotsky, such shows like The Robber by Chapik, Tattoo Rose by Williams, Live and Remember by Rasputin. Every performance by Dodin evokes a great interest of the audience. Staging of the novel Dom, Home, based on the novel of Fyodor Abramov in 1980, marked appearance of a special phenomena, which later has been called the Theatre of Lev Dodin. Very soon, Lev Dodin became the artistic director of a small drama theatre, which resulted in a long list of performances released by the company, basing on the stories by Garin, Goldberg, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, Grossman, was brought to the theatre a worldwide fame. In the end of the 90s, this theatre received a status of Theatre of Europe, having joined the union of the most famous European companies. So it's clear, it's evident that such a highly titled drama theatre is getting too tight in the previous form, and it becomes gets the federal status and becomes the fourth after Mariinsky, Alexandrinka and Bedete. And for nearly 20 years, Lev Dodin has been performing duties of artistic director and chief director, fairly enough, and people, not by chance, have been calling this theatre for all these years just simply the Dodin's theatre. And once again, good evening. And while we had this short movie, we had our guest, the professor of this institute, Marina Dmitrevskaya, and the chief editor of this site of the magazine, Zhanna Zaretskaya. And we, together with them, are going to speak about relations between the classics and the modern stage and modern theater, because we remember that during the last decades we have so many disputes and so many discourses, very often which result with some administrative measures. And the first question I would like to start with is that what can we believe to be classics, actually? Is this a piece of art which is included in the school program, or are these pieces of literature that have been written within 70 years? And what is classics? Marina Yulievna. So I think that classics is what is required, what is demanded in different times. So, for example, the modern play, it might stay in its own time, but if in some time it is still requested by the stage, and if it passes to a different epoch, then it becomes a classical play, and one and the same scriptwriters, they either stay in their time or they become classical writers. And there is one very good phrase of Vinokur, that not only the past comes to the present, but also the present goes to the past, because we have to understand what is common between all those times. So the common things which unite and get united different places between times. So can we make a list of plays like under the title of classics and underline a whole group of the names which refer to classical, but you as the historian of the theater, you know about Shpazhinsky, but where Shpazhinsky is now? Or, for example, Polivoy in the 19th century. So those things which were really very actively discussed in their times hasn't passed to us. So there are no any laws applicable to that. This is the time that really evokes the theme and the play to us. It happens that some play and the characters might happen to be on the stage, but we see that from stage to stage we see the same names of the plays. But what is, Zhanna, your attitude to classics? What do you believe to be the theater classics? I underline the drama, not the drama theater, but just classical. Of course, this is those pieces of art are classical that are requested and demanded by the theater. But I am really preoccupied with the Russian theme, Russian plays. There is a specific thing between the relations between Russia and modern world. So there is not any other country like Russia. So if the piece of literature is classical and it is staged, then it passes under the title of untouchable relics. So it becomes something which you cannot interpret, you cannot transform. So we do not have equality like that at the moment in our country, because classical things are defined by encyclopedias and by the dictionaries. So in Russia, if we speak about Russia, so a classical thing, this is something which cannot be interpreted or translated to the modern life. But even in our forum, we had discussion the boundaries of the classical plays. I want to make one more comment. We have to understand that theater people know it, that the way it is written by the author, the drama play can be embodied only in one way, only in polygraphical way. So the theater as the art of interpretation and embodiment. Like, for example, the first line, "Why are you dressed in all black?" It can be pronounced in all different ways. So those people who guard the boundaries of classical attitude, have to understand that there is a world of a writer, and either we penetrate to this world or not. But speaking about very strict boundaries, this is really very stupid if we follow just the writer, because each of us can read the play, and there is a theory of reading. There is the truth of a reader, and I would like to understand if the modern author is protected by the law. But what happens to the classical writer? It happens that it is not protected at all. Well, the mere fact that the authors of the past belong to classics, they are already protected. Let's go back to the ancient Greece. So viewers in the ancient Greece who went there to the theater, they knew very well the stories of the ancient Greece. They knew about the story of the eagle and what the eagle would do. He knew about Antigona, that Polynica was going to bury Antigona. So they went to the theater to see the staging. They knew very well the plot. They didn't go to the theater to see the plot, but they went to the theater just to see the interpretation, the staging, the way it was staged. So, Victor, maybe you can understand me, but then I also try to understand the rights of the readers and the views. As a rule, people do not read the plays. But people, the viewers, go to the theater and they really laugh there, though they haven't read the play. But how can we protect the viewer who would like to watch the play, but the theater shows to the audience some modern version of the classical play? So we know this is the fact already, that the audience doesn't read the plays. Well, people are different, but actually when people get maturer in their education and in their spiritual requirements, they do want to see the real performance which stages the play, and they really want to read the play. Now, you speak as the theater critic. The usual people do not go every month to the theater. Yeah, this is a very great problem, because when we, the theater critics, we go to the theater and watch the performance for 100 of times already. And a different thing is when just our viewers, our audience, just people go to the theater. There should be, so from this point of view, I believe there should be many versions. If you want to look at the costumed staging, the staging with costumes, this is one thing, but And suppose you want to see the authentic forms, you can go to Ленсовет Theater and see Revizor over there. But if you want to get some new form of Revizor, you can get the performance and see the performance somewhere else. And I can remember a very sad story. You know, I have very sad impressions of people, teenagers especially, who go to the theater to watch the classical Hamlet story. I just want to remind to the audience that they can ask the questions to our guests. Every time when you ask your question, we have, please tell us the city, where are you from? And we want also to remind you that the author of the best question, he receives the gift from the committee of our festival. My next question. Every time when you say it's difficult to find the traditional version of the play, but in this respect, when we speak about the attitude to the play, what are the main criteria of your assessment? How do you assess the modern plays and modern stagings? Well, actually, I've already said that the cross point is very important, where the play meets the time. I'm very skeptical, actually, to the European tradition, for example, of changing the dress, changing the coat, and changing the clothes of the classics, and getting it adjusted to our modern times. I think this is really very cheap variant. Let's talk about Mary Stuart. Suppose Elizabeth represents United Russia, and Maria Stuart is going to represent the opposition, and we just change them, and it's going to be very dull. It's not interesting. But where you have seen this, this is very vulgar. Well, this is a vulgar modernization, but we've got plenty of that on the stage, because actually we had that in the 18th century, when there was the audience who just had to get adjusted itself to this stage, and so the drama writers of the 18th century, they had to combine different aspects, different features, combining in one play lives of the peasants and life of the dukes. Yes, you have a wonderful memory, Zhanna. And what about your main criteria of assessing and giving the scores if the performance is made based on the classical novel? Well, actually, I don't see performances like that, and I don't see the audience like this. Suppose a Revizor in Pskov, idiot in the old house. Very often, very many vulgar modern plays. This is why, well, my experience is really very different. I think that if there are changes, they are very subtle changes. There is a demand for existentiality. So let us judge the performances according to the laws which the writers make. When I read the lectures to the viewers, I always tell that the author of the performance is not the person who wrote the play, but the artistic director, and I always make comparison with the foreign language. Suppose you study the foreign language, and every time when you have the first class of it, you have to understand what are the laws of the grammar and what are the laws of lexicology. So then you have to understand, you may understand, knowing all this, you may understand what are the laws of the language. You have to understand that what you see on the stage, this is a special language, special drama and theater language. Well, I keep to the opposite idea and opposite meaning. I cannot share your opinion. You know, any classical play is some volume of information, some space of information. And if we just imagine the spheres, the two different spheres getting overlapped, so the director can get a very big part of this sphere, and the common thing, the overlapping thing, is going to make the performance. But there are directors who approach all this content and just push it away, and they want to create their own approach and their own picture, which is really very shallow. So who is going to, that's why I ask you the question, who's going to protect the classical writer? Well, it's critics. The theater critics are going to protect. Yeah, of course, if we deal with the very shallow and very dull directors, then we have to protect them, really. But I actually don't see really dull directors model. No, I do not share your opinion. I think that now theater works with science, with like mathematical science. It doesn't share and doesn't give to the audience such a wide scale of images, which could be interesting for the viewer to watch. I know in St. Petersburg there are two performances. This is the Crime and Punishment in Приют Комедианта and Karamazov's brothers. I can tell you frankly that every time when I go and watch these performances, I read new things out of these performances, because unlike in other theaters, you really but you know what? The person who would like to see Crime and Punishment would hardly go to Приют Комедианта, because it's first thing is difficult to get the ticket, and it's difficult to get the ticket at the audience theater. So there is a problem. So Zhanna believes that we have a very beautiful picture. We have a very beautiful picture, and the situation is very favorable. We can go to BDT and see the storm, for example. Oh, okay. So this is the recipe for our audience. First, try to understand what kind of theater is more closer to your spiritual intentions. And, you know, every time when we go to the concert of Tchaikovsky, we don't expect Shostakovich, but that's why every time when we go to Masterskaya theater, we understand that it's going to be very subtle and very careful approach to the text of the play.
Я бы сейчас про то, что ставил Григорий Михайлович Козлов. Назовем это имя, да? Есть там и другие режиссеры. Вот.
Every time when I go to and see the storm of Maguchi, I understand that it's not going to be some other performances from, you know, we have a number of the Storms performances. It's very interesting to compare. So you are the theater critics, but I am talking about the audience, just people. So, Victor, what do you think if the attitude of the classics and has changed? Because in your theater there are also very disputable things happen in your theater. Well, you know, I'm very pleased today to hear to your discourse, and it's very interesting. Where does the classic begin? I have a full understanding that the meaning of the classics for the audience, for those people who come to the theater, maybe starts at the very early years in school, and the way they are explained, the classics, it's like the first love. So this is going to be his load, and understanding for the literature, classical literature, is going to stay with him for the whole of his life. Today, when we have open technologies and very good and quick technologies, this is the youth. They can very easily go to internet and watch and see and check what they are going to see in the theaters and make it clear for themselves. Because, to my mind, there is we live in the times of the artistic freedom. So it is possible today to find out what you are going to see. And this is the second point. Another point is that I want to remember the performance Onegin in Vakhtangov theater. And every time I remember what the director of this theater told me, some people were really resenting this idea that the audience said that this is not Pushkin. So Remus, the director, he said that I want to go to people and talk to them. And the director told him, no, don't go. Well, when Remus, the artistic director, went to people and just wanted to listen to them, Remus said, how do you know that this is not Pushkin? Did he himself told you? Well, the question comes that once the audience suited the performance for showing sex on the stage, accusing the theater showing the sexual intercourse during the performance. So how can you comment things like that when on the stage they show pornography? So this is the question, you know. I would like to maybe agree with the audience. I believe actually that this is awful, and very often it happens that the director is not talented, and if they make sexual things, it happens to be very poorly staged, and so. On the other side, these performances, they teach the audience to understand the logics. We have to get quiet. Actually, 4% of the population go to the theater. Theater is a very elite art. So that's why that 4%, I believe that there is only 4% of the population, of the world population, who realize where they go. And I really regret that in my childhood, there was a performance, the performance by Griboyedov, which was the best, and that was the best performance for my experience when the director could find the way how to tell me about my time using the characters of the play. Okay, but what shall we do in these cases? How the audience have to protect themselves? From what they have to get protected? So, Hamlet and Ophelia, for example, the intercourse between them. Well, the audience has the right to leave the performance. Well, and what? And to require reimburse the tickets? Well, no, not reimbursing. Well, this is just the mere fact that the audience, the viewer, just didn't like the performance. Well, you are at the moment provoking us. Of course, this is very good that you are provoking us. And you always try to tell us that there are restrictions. You know, very oftenly I'm asked the questions about restrictions. Always there is a question coming from, is it okay to undress people on the stage? Is it okay to use obscene language? I believe these are stupid questions. Well, 40 years ago, in Kachyrgin answered this question that it is possible to do everything. It's just important to understand why you do it. We spoke with Borodin, and one of the first question was like, what are you doing today in the modern theater? You've got only pornography. Well, just tell me where pornography you see. I will go to that theater and just watch it. You know, the viewer who gave this question is really very interesting. I would have redirected the person who applied to the court and started the lawsuit against the theater. I would have directed him to a different direction, to mass media. Let me interfere a little bit. Well, now I am thinking about this question, and of course it's clear. Four of us, we are all having different opinions. Still, we think about, we share the common opinion. But really now, I'm started to think that of course, this is not... So the viewer who reads a book, he doesn't like it, suppose, he can just put it away. He doesn't pay for that. The person who buys something, he can return back to this shop and return return his purchase, which he didn't like. And the theater is the maybe only field where you pay money for a ticket. You cannot reimburse yourself for the failure of your impressions. Well, actually, all this depends on the theater managers. And when tickets are sold, it should be marked that there are scenes with nakedness, nude, and suppose someone who comes to the booking office and says Hamlet, if in annotation of the theater you tell about that and he didn't read it, he missed it, that's his responsibility. But when the viewer is a reasonable person, he has to make a survey. You are professionals, that's why you speak like that. You say this, but we are talking about just people, just mere audiences, and people do not carry out surveys. Well, a person like that, he just goes to the internet and he goes to the site of the St. Petersburg Theatre magazine, and he reads not only what we write over there, but he also reads different opinions and the whole pool of opinions, and he can make it clear for himself what he can watch and what he does not want to watch. So Well, the morning issue of the newspaper comes out, and people can read in the newspapers. We can just tell to our guests that we understand that every time when you go to the theater, you have to be prepared. We understand that there is only 4% of the population who go to the theater, and this is very elite art, and the audience has to be prepared for that. It's not for everybody. And our next stage is that again we ask and we remind you that our viewers online can ask us any kind of questions, and just not to forget to tell us your city where you come from. So we again want to underline that if the question is really very interesting, we're going to give a present to. Another thing is that theatre is a very alive substance, and cooperation with the theatre is a very alive thing. When I was the schoolgirls of the 6th grade, I went to the performance What to Do by Chernyshevsky, and I was really very resentful to that performance.
Только смотрите, я так понимаю.
Только рукописи, которые не горят. Ну вот, а с другой стороны,
but on the other side, when I was resentful to Uncle Vanya of Necrocious, and it took me time in order to understand the language of Necrocious. It's so interesting, but I was growing with the feeling, because we were children of freedom. Our generation had the spirit of freedom. We understood very well that the theater can be any type of the theater, may have any shape and form. And every time when I'm in Russia or in Europe, before pandemic, we used to go there very oftenly. Well, being in this theater hall, I understand that the audience has zero level of aggressiveness, but they have only wish what the artist wanted to say. So this is the presumption of innocence towards the theater and the author of the performance. And this is what I like very much from the European audience. But there is another side of this question. So the person goes to the theater and he watches something which he doesn't accept, doesn't understand, doesn't like. And it happens that this kind of people are just splashed away from the theater when the authors say and the critics say, well, this is just is not yours. You have to understand that actually the viewers are very conservative. More than that, the viewers want to see those things which are on the level of his expectations. A little bit, if it is a little bit difficult, then he is offended, and he might feel offended and even insulted, but the viewer wants to see those things which confirm those the knowledge that he has, and everything which is new and unexpectedly new for him really makes him very uncomfortable, because adults, they bring children to the theaters. Like, for example, we have a performance, the Young Boy and Carlson, and when people go to that performance, they're really sure what parents know what their children are going to see there. For example, from 1949 in Moscow, there is a performance going in the children's theater, and the performance has been running since 1949, and adults see the same things. The conservative audience like that should not be pushed away from the theater. There should not be any contempt shown to the audience. Alyonushka gives, nods her head, puts her head on the shoulder of Batyushka, and this is very conservative. Alyonushka has to put her head on the shoulder of her Batyushka in a very appropriate way, same way as she has been doing all these years since 1949. Well, another question. I come to see three sisters, and over there the actors send SMS to each other. When I go to the Chief from Wisdom, I see unexpected things. Do we have to understand that whether the artistic director is supposed to be like that? The artistic director, is he obliged to leave the period, the historical period of time where the play was written, and just has to travel to the modern life? Well, it cannot be in any other way. It cannot be any reconstruction of the historical time. Even the music, when is performed on authentic instruments, still it goes out of the authenticity. There is no authenticity. The performance is a very subtle and momentum thing. Today you show one and the same performance is different in different ways, in different days. This is a unique art. You play the performance today, and it finishes tonight at 9 o'clock. Tomorrow, the same performance is going to be different because it is going to be played tomorrow. Well, I do not like vulgar modernization. Well, I'm just surprised that the viewer gives us the example only of this kind of shows. But once again, the tiles, the Sobyanin tiles that you see on the stage, or the naked people, or the office suit, it has all the reasons for that. So here we get to this phrase of Kachiragin. It's important to remember why they do it. So the question is the director obliged? No, the answer is not. He is not obliged. Of course, we may see different things, but the performances with historical truth, they might be also good or bad. Another question from Perm. If the crisis in the theater affects the bigger number, if the crisis in good performances really affects the number of the modern performances, modern plays. Excuse me, I don't understand this. What is this? The crisis in regard to the initial resource. So now I remember, I'm trying to remember the 19th century plays, and so when we speak about the theater of directors, these were always interpretations. But what about Shakespeare? What did he do? He just took any plot he could get and just did whatever he wanted. I think if there is any kind of crisis, then this is a crisis of the plot, the essence of the plot. If the theme, the essence of the performance is readable at the first line, then it's not a good performance when it is immediately clear. But when you have a performance, when you have to discover something new, when you have to learn, when you have to make a survey during the performance, then it is really interesting. The directors, of course, we see here that there is a different attitude to different type of performances, and every person has by himself to determine what he really wants, what the viewer wants. We have our conversation was going on here like a real turmoil, and we need to select now the best question. There were 3 questions. I like the question, the last one. I like the last question about a woman bringing examples from Moscow. We can tell that she was watching us. The General Yepanchin in the uniform of the colonel of militia, it might be good, it might be bad. And even the Sobyanin tile might be good if the performance was made by a talented director. And to Tatiana in Moscow, we sent this parcel. So Tatiana is going to get the gift. And I want to remind to you that today we are going to watch the performance by Lev Dodin, Uncle Vanya, in small drama theater. This performance is not new, and we on purposely started our program with the performance which can be considered as the sample, as the very good example, as a real model for performances which was tested by time, which has survived the test of time. And you can see on our screen the information about the site where we broadcast this performance. Now we have to thank everybody. Well, let's say that we have different opinions, because some people believe that there is a crisis in the theater, and some people believe that the theater is flourishing at the moment. You understand that we are going to continue our dispute and our discourse. And I want to thank everybody who supported our festival. Neva-Art company and the art project company are thankful to Committee of Culture for financial support and their partners. This is the Russian Academic Institute of Scenic Arts. In Contact, 78 channel, the St. Petersburg Diary, the bookstore Bridge. Special thanks to Siba Cafe, for we can enjoy the high quality coffee made of beans. And for our security during pandemic was responsible Krasno-Polyanskaya makeup company, which provided us antiseptics. And once again, I remind you that we invite you to watch the performance Uncle Vanya, and then tomorrow by 7 o'clock, I invite you to meet the group of authors of Oblomov performance from the Komissarzhevskaya Theater. So now I want to say goodbye, and I hope that I will see our audience tomorrow at 7 o'clock.